Actually, I have a copy of it, and that book is beautiful. I was really, really blown away by it. Steamrolled like 20 questions worth of answers. I came over, we were chatting, and he did that thing where he said, "Do you remember me?" 10 times as much attention as I would in a normal show. Been times where I've been hired where I had an editor contact me and they say, "There's a current series. We don't think it's working." Actually, I have a copy of it, and that book is beautiful. I was really, really blown away by it. Steamrolled like 20 questions worth of answers. I came over, we were chatting, and he did that thing where he said, "Do you remember me?" 10 times as much attention as I would in a normal show. Been times where I've been hired where I had an editor contact me and they say, "There's a current series. We don't think it's working."
The questions, Anshul?
Yeah, I will start. So, Jim, we had asked few of our social media friends and people of you are coming, and we asked them for questions for you. So I'll just ask them. It's some of them you have already answered. So I'll just mention the question. We can skip.
I just steamrolled like 20 questions worth of answers. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So first question is from Tadam Gaidu. You must have heard about him. He's the he drew the Marvel Indian Spider-Man.
Yeah, I got to meet him actually, which was wonderful.
Yeah. So his question is, he says, for relatively new creators, would you suggest going for creator-owned projects with Image Comics, or they should stick with traditional publishers like Marvel or DC to gain some exposure before jumping into creator-owned projects?
I mean, the reality is... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You have detailed articles about the business of creator-owned projects with Image Comics in your blogs, right? But they are old. He mentions that they are old now. Do you see any changes in the scenario, or you stick to the same?
I mean, the reality is most people are not going to be able to start with Marvel or DC. Like that's like, it's like saying, should I start with the Major League Baseball or should I start with the double A's? And you're like, well, you're probably gonna have to go through the double A's first. Like, unless you're, again, like I said before, unless you're creating professional quality work, just like that, you're usually gonna have to go through you're gonna have to build your own comics anyways. And Image is just one publisher out of many. Don't get me wrong, they've been obviously formative to my career. But I don't even think you need a publisher as much as you used to, whether it's crowdfunding or whether it's online or things like that. There's so many more outlets for people to be able to make work and put it online, or going to conventions or some combination therein. You're not limited to just one thing anymore. The reality is you need to finish work. You need to put it out there. You need to show people that you're consistent, that the quality is there. And you're going to have to do that before Marvel or DC or Dark Horse or IDW are going to trust you anyways. I know some people, they're dead set. I'll see superhero page samples from them over and over and over again. And it's cool that they're doing these 3 sample pages of whatever, the Hulk fighting the Thing or Miles Morales doing his laundry. Like, I don't know, whatever. They're cool. They're fun little things, but you'd be better off just doing a 20-page story of your own design. And if it's action-packed and cool, then people will be like, oh, I bet you'd do a good Spider-Man, rather than trying to jump the gun. And I get it. Don't get me wrong. People want to do these commercial characters and they want to work on those things. But like Daniel Warren Johnson, for example, he was putting out these beautiful, crazy, independent, one-shot comic stories. And they were really fun stuff. And the minute he started doing those, people were like, man, I would love to see what he would do with the commercial characters. And now he's worked on, Wonder Woman and Transformers and Thor stuff and all these different things because his own independent stuff was so compelling and so interesting and so well put together, So although my articles are slightly older, I think a lot of the material in there is still pretty viable. The numbers might have slightly changed, the nature of the internet or things have slightly changed, but the reality is a creative portfolio. And that's not just comic books. Like if you want to be an actor, you're probably going to work in student films and independent productions and local theater plays and stuff like that before anyone's going to just cast you in some Broadway or some Hollywood role. Like, yes, there are people who've been plucked out of nowhere and they get a career, but that is very, very rare. And it's certainly not something that you can rely on. If you think you're going to be the exception to the rule, that's not a really good way to plan out or work towards your creative career. If you get those lucky bursts forward, if an editor takes a shine to you and says, hey kid, have you got a Spider-Man story? Great. Take the advantage of the opportunity as it comes your way. But assuming that you're going to get that, that's crazy, you know? Yeah.
So I think that probably you would have got your answer. So next question is from Bijoy Ravindram. He's Bijoy and Utsav. They are creators of Technicolor lovers and Indian comics. Maybe you got a chance to see in India.
I do. Actually, I have a copy of it, and that book is beautiful. I was really, really blown away by it. It was one of the books that I actually wrote about in my newsletter, where I said, look, this stuff, you know, there are creators in every country in the world that are doing stuff that is amazing and high quality that are just off our radar because they're on the other side of the world and we're not aware of it. Yeah.
So Bijoy's question is, the question is from Bijoy and Utsav both. They ask you, if pitching to international publishers is tougher than ever, most ignore cold submissions and stories set in a non-Western world or culture are even harder to sell. What's your advice for breaking through?
I mean, the reality is, I think it's easy to look at it and sort of say, hey, you know, this North American publisher isn't interested in what we're doing. And yes, that may be true. And it is definitely, it's hard to cold call anybody, right? It's hard for you to put your work in front of a company and basically say, hey, I know you didn't have any plans for this or any budget for this, but you should make this a priority right now. I mean, that's hard to do. If you went to a film company, if you went to a record producer and you're like, you know what, you should sign our band instead of working on all the guys that you currently have. Like, cold calling anyone creatively is crazy difficult. And then you're also adding the labor involved in, is there a market for this thing? If we are a North American publisher and the majority of our audience is a North American audience, is there an added barrier for them to publish a story that is set in another part of the world? Of course there is. In the same way that it can be hard for, if I went to, you know, an African publisher or an Indian publisher or a Chinese publisher, and I said, man, I got a great comic idea. You guys got to publish in Hong Kong. And they're going to be like, why? You know, not to say you shouldn't do it or that it's impossible, but think of how odd that sounds. I know there's all these people that talk about wanting to break into the manga industry. You know what I mean? And they're like, I want to be in Shonen Jump. And think about the thousands of artists that are trying that live in Japan, that speak Japanese, that want to work in the manga industry. Now you have a language barrier and a cultural barrier and a geographic barrier. Why don't I just jump in front of all those people and you take me instead? Your work has to be that much more compelling, that much more potent, that much more. Is it possible? Absolutely. Is it likely? I don't know. It's really, really, really hard. You know what I mean? You have to then create work that speaks sort of universally in terms of concept and sort of precept, in terms of theme, in terms of vision or art. You know, anime has conquered the world, so it proves it can definitely go the other way. We definitely are ingesting Japanese stories in a big, big, big way, because those themes, whatever you might, the classic kind of shonen themes of like, I'm going to prove myself, or I'm going to grow, I'm going to be the best person I can be, or I'm going to overcome these odds or whatever, they have struck a chord universally, right? You know, and so it's definitely possible to propagate your ideas to a global audience, but the deeper you know, are playing the cultural card or the geographic card, the harder it's going to be for a publisher in another market to look and go, can we sell this to our audience? Do you know what I mean? And again, there are obviously exceptions. You can look and you can say, yeah, but Hollywood entertainment's all over the world. You're like, sure, but these superheroes and these concepts are now global icons. You know, Batman's different. it's not, you know, the same kind of thing, right? You know, McDonald's is different. Everyone wants a hamburger, you know, or whatever they have.
Years to establish that brand, and after that they came to that level, right?
Sorry, say it again.
I say like Batman or McDonald's, right? They firstly initially took time to establish their brand.
Of course.
And after that, right? Batman is not 10 years or 15 years old.
No, and this is the thing, is that I know people can have the chip on their shoulder because they're like, why don't these companies want to publish whatever more work from a wider audience or whatever? And the reality is, if that was your publishing company and you only have the capacity to put out, I'm just going to make up a number, 10 projects a year, where are you putting your chips? Where are you putting your money? Where are you putting your budget and your attention, right? You're going to put it hopefully on the most commercially viable stuff. And then if you're lucky, you might be able to look and go, let's do a couple wildcard things, or let's do something unexpected. But you have to have vision to do that. You have to have editors who also feel like their jobs are so safe that they can take risks. And in the publishing industry, a lot of people don't have that kind of safety. So, one of the things I hear about all the time is, why do they keep using the same creators and the same artists and the same people? And you're like, dude, if your job was predicated on, we got to get this comic done at the end of the month, are you going to go with a complete unknown who might screw it up and then you lose your job? Or are you going to go with the dependable person that's done it last month and they did it 6 months ago and they're going to do it 7 months from now? And you might know that person now personally, their family, you've met them at conventions. So when they call you and they say, hey, have you got any work for me? You're going to be like, no, I'm going to go with the complete unknown guy who sent me an email at 4 a.m. I don't have any work for you, buddy. I'm sorry. And people say, well, that's nepotistic. And you're like, well, sure. But that's true of every industry, right? If I told you, are you going to go with the person you know and trust, or are you going to go with the complete unknown? Most people are going to go with know and trust, unless the quality is so much higher or so much more compelling that pushes you through that barrier. When I see an artist, I go to a convention and I'm wandering Artist Alley and I see some unbelievable art. I want to create that bond. I want to know who you are. I want to work with you. I'm fascinated and intrigued. So something like Technicolor Lovers, the art was so good that I was just like, what is this? This is amazing. And now we're staying in touch and we're chatting and things like that. And I hope something comes from those conversations. I can't get them a publishing gig, or I can't force those things to happen, but it certainly made me sit up and take notice because the work was very high quality, right? But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone to Mumbai Comic-Con, if we hadn't had those conversations. It's all a weird series of
events,
relationship building, and you take your shots and you're putting your work out there. There are these weird moments. I remember early on, I would send emails to all sorts of professionals when Skull Kickers was coming out. And I was in the industry for a long time already. And I was sending random emails. You're trying to get pull quotes and you're trying to get visibility. And some people would respond politely and they would say, oh, I'll check it out. And they never get back to you. And most people don't respond at all because they don't know who you are and they don't have time and they don't have, the brain space to do that. A year later, 2 years later, I could meet those people in person. I don't want to say to them, hey, yeah, I sent you my book. You never responded. Like, that's what good is that going to do at this moment in time? Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's that awkward thing where you have to be sort of magnanimous and you have to sort of keep punching away. And I had a weird experience when I was in England for this trip that just went past. I had a guy come to me and he was talking to me, and you've got to keep in mind, I'm going to like 14, 15 conventions a year. I'm meeting hundreds and hundreds of people. I have tons of friends and contacts, but I'm also sort of jet lagged. And, and this guy came over, we were chatting, and he did that thing where he said, do you remember me?
Never do that.
And you're like, how is this going to go down? Right? The minute that I saw you at my table, if I did remember you, I would say so. Or I would say, have we met before? You know what I mean? If I haven't prompted that, that probably means no. But now you've asked me. So now we're going to have that awkward moment of me saying, no, I don't remember you. So now you feel like crap. And then he said to me, oh, we met at another convention like 6 years ago. Like, dude, like I deeply appreciate, and I know, and that's not me trying to be a jerk. That's not me like thinking I'm better than you or bigger than you. It's not. It's just like how am I supposed to remember that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And now the good news is I will remember you, but now my memories are all around this awkward interaction.
But in
So
a way,
next
you
time
will
I
remember
see
him.
you,
So
I'm going to
that's
be
nice.
like, oh, it's this guy who made me feel like crap. You know what I mean? And I've
But he
had
got
those
what he wanted.
moments.
Yeah.
I've had those moments where I've met someone multiple times, and then eventually, when you realize it, that finally you stuck, they're like, "Oh, hey, yeah, man, it's good to see you again," and you're like, "Great." I wish that had happened 3 interactions earlier, but we're here now. Okay, let's make the most of it, or whatever. That's the sort of the best you can do. My wife and I, we have this funny thing where when we're interacting with people, wherever possible, if I remember someone's name right from the get-go, of course I'll introduce them. And if I don't, I will introduce her first. So then she asks their name. So then I get the name again so that I don't feel like I've forgotten everyone's name. So there's a secret weapon that I've just given you.
That's a nice trick.
I think if Anshul meets you in a convention, he's going to show you this recording. Do you remember me?
Do you remember me? And I'll be like, damn. Yeah. And again, I think it's just one of those weird kind of things. I've had the opposite happen where I'll reintroduce myself to someone and they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, hey, I'm Jim. And they go, I know. And I'm just like, oh, okay, great. I don't want to assume. That people know.
So there's the next question. He's from one of our friend. He was supposed to be on podcast but couldn't make it. Vivek.
Okay.
This question is: you have seen the comic industry change over the years. So with the latest coming of AI, right, where it's impacting artists as a lot. Do you see any changes to the whole comics industry impacting writers also?
I mean, yes. The reality though is no one knows where this stuff's going to be 5 years, 10 years from now. So it's impossible for me to have a crystal ball and tell you how things are going to be in the future. But I can tell you right now, no one goes to a convention to praise a computer. No one goes online to discuss stories and art and go, man, that prompt was so compelling. like the mistake that corporations have made is that they think we want content. And you hear this word content. Dude, we got more than enough content. We will never see all the movies and read all the books and read all the comics and have the experiences that we want to have from now until we're dead. And those were made by people. And there's more work being put out by people all the time. So if you think it's just about filling the seconds and minutes and hours of the day till we're dead with AI shit, like you're so wrong. Like you're so foolishly wrong. We are trying to connect with each other and we're trying to be engaged and compelled. And some of that content is silly and ludicrous. It doesn't have to always be deep and meaningful. It doesn't have to be a deep, emotional, lyrical experience. But some of it should be a very heartfelt, philosophical, emotional, symbolic kind of thing that we're trying to see in the films and in the books and in the art that we partake of. And taking all of that and throwing it into a blender and then spitting it out the other side and then going, is it good enough? Do you have your gruel? Is like the most insulting aspect of this whole thing. And some of the writers that are looking at this as a tool, or they're sort of like, well, I can put this in and it'll give me instant feedback. I don't know, man. Like, that's not why I do what I do. I don't want, that's not to say that, sure, when I'm under the deadline, would I like it to be easier or faster? Yeah, ostensibly I would, but I certainly wouldn't be proud of it if it just spat it back at me and I said, well, that's pretty good. All right, I'll just put my name on that and away we go. Like the guy who phones to order a pizza didn't cook the pizza. He's not a chef. If I tell you I want mushroom double pepperoni, I didn't make the pizza. I just called and told you to make the pizza, So I don't understand this mentality about authors or artists wanting, especially the art thing. I get again, you're under the gun or under the deadline, but I love to draw and I love to see that working process of problem solving rather than it just being like, whoop, another one done, spit it out, get her out, you know, kind of thing. These tools are amazing and the technology is amazing. You know, Photoshop and software and all that stuff, when you're using it, yes, is it easier than using whatever paints and markers and pens and things? But there's a primacy to the work that you're still trying to keep in terms of your thought process and your influences and what you love about art, ideally as much as possible, the aesthetic decisions that you're making. And I think the people that want instant gratification and instant storytelling and instant art, they literally don't understand why people do this. You know, they don't understand why I like to tell stories and why I like to entertain people. And it's certainly not to get this as quickly as possible and vomit it out to you, you know, as an audience. So I don't know that that's like the answer.
No, I really like.
I don't think there is the answer. I think everyone's got their own
this is the answer. I think because
This is the
the
answer.
way you mentioned, right? We have invited Zim Zub, right? We cannot invite Chat GPT or, you know,
right.
AI and
Well,
talk to them about their books, right?
What amazes me too is that because the data going into these AI, you know, predictive texts are built off of such complex systems and databases, they're now aggregating bad data, right? So, you know, I remember, I think early on, before it became really grotesque, Ryan North hopped in his own name in Chat GPT and he said, "Who is Ryan North?" And Chat GPT spat it out and said, you know, he's a writer and comic book creator in Toronto, Ontario. And it had all these, most of the stuff about him was correct. And then it said that he had 2 dogs. And one of the dogs was the actual name of his dog. And the other name of his dog was, there's a very particular thing that he had done online where his dog had done something stupid and he called his dog a dummy or whatever. And it went viral. So he had a second dog named Dummy. And it was like, because the data, it knew there was a dog and there was 2 dogs associated with Ryan North, but it doesn't understand one of them's a nickname. Do you know what I mean? And that's the kind of bad data that then propagates endlessly, that you can't get that out of the system, you know? And then once it's in the system, well, is it now real? Like when you type that into the prompt, does it come out? I don't know, like how you pull that out by the roots and then tell it, I don't have a second dog named Dummy or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and so when I type into Google and it tries to give me that AI summary, I don't trust it, because you can't trust it because the data is so crappy, because it's propagated with weird stuff. And every so often I'll type in something and I know the answer and it'll give me the wrong answer. And I go, well, if I know this and I know this is wrong, I can't trust any response I'm ever going to get from this thing, right? You know, my Wikipedia article on who Jim Zub is not up to date. It's not a bad source of information, but it's not the full developed source of information. And now you're feeding that through a filter and it's spitting out weird data. And there's some other dude on Facebook named Jim Zub who has some other occupation, and maybe you mix us together and all of a sudden, I don't know, like, it just seems so crazy to me that people feel like this is the answer to all their problems when it's really just creating different problems, I think.
Another question from Vivek is, which is one project that you would love to work on?
Which is, sorry?
Another one project that you would love to work on.
Sure.
Or a character.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do Doctor Strange. I love the supernatural side of the Marvel Universe. And when I was a kid, like the guy who was a wizard and a superhero was really cool, you know? I was a Spider-Man kid growing up, so I would deeply love to do Spider-Man stuff. Very, very deep love, obviously, of that character. And you know, I think there's a reason why Peter Parker is such a universally beloved character, you know, because he speaks to something in all of us, especially shy little nerd guy, you know, growing up. So those are 2 that come to mind offhand. In the DC universe, I've always wanted to do stuff with like Suicide Squad or Harley Quinn. You know, I think Batman is a really cool character, but I always like kind of the rogues gallery and everything around him almost more than Bruce Wayne himself. And I find that stuff kind of interesting and compelling in that way. The reality is I have contributed to a lot of the things that I deeply love, and I've been very, very fortunate to do so. There were these series of books when I was growing up, you know, the choose your own adventure books. There was do you know the ones I'm talking about? But in England, there was a whole different series of them. They were called Fighting Fantasy, and they were these like nasty, cool English choose your own adventure books. So I have a weird soft spot for those. I would love to do something associated with that. Like the 3 pillars of my sword and sorcery influences are like Dungeons and Dragons, Conan the Barbarian, and this thing called Fighting Fantasy. And I contributed to the other 2. So I feel like if I had that one, I don't know, like some astrological thing would happen. It would be like the perfect, you know,
fulfilling something big,
full circle. Yeah, my 9-year-old self would float out of my body, finally exercised. So yeah, there's things like that. But the reality now is I'm at a weird point where I just want to make more of my own stories as well. I want to do more creator-owned books. I want to have stuff that work with creators who I love and make things together. That is sort of my biggest goal. And if some of that stuff is commercial, that's great. If someone comes to me and says, man, you'd be a great fit for whatever, fill in the blank, that's awesome. But I'm just as interested, or perhaps even more interested, in just being like, hey, man, I think we work really well together, or your artwork is really amazing to me. What are you most excited about? It's almost like we've come full circle. Now I'm going back to the Skull Kickers kind of creator owned, but now with the ability and the confidence that I can bring a readership hopefully with me. Mm-hmm. And that's really special, that the people that read Conan and the people that read Avengers or whatever, some of them, or enough of them, are able to want to stick around and see what else I've got, you know, as far as that goes. And the Conan plans that I've got right now, the long-term stuff that we're building is really, really special. And it feels so cool to be in the midst of it and know that we can foreshadow and pay off those things. And so I'm kind of in the midst of one of my dream projects right now at this moment. And that knowing that and feeling that is really, really cool. And certainly not something I ever want to take for granted. But yeah, there are other characters I think are really cool. Like, you know, Michael Moorcock's Elric character is another fantasy character I think is badass and would love to sort of do something with at some point. But I'm sure after I get off this call, I'll think of like another half dozen sort of characters. I had a really cool pitch
don't forget that whole project written and drawn by Jim.
That's right. Yeah. And then I got my own graphic novel thing I want to do as well. But like, you know, I have a cool pitch for Blade, the vampire hunter character at Marvel that I would love to do. That's been sort of stewing around in my head. And I pitched it once, and at the timing wasn't right at Marvel. But I no longer get worried about that stuff. I know a lot of people, they'll pitch an idea, and if it doesn't get picked up, they're sort of like, oh my God, you know, I suck, or why won't they let me do this? I had a project. One of the first things I ever pitched to the big 2, this is a really good little anecdote. 2004, my friend Ray Fox, who's done all sorts of work at DC now and a little bit at Marvel, but at the time he had just done one Vertigo book. He did a book called Nemivore, which was really funky and weird. And he was the only person I had grown up with who was working professionally in comics. So I was like, oh my God, if you can do it, anything's possible. Like maybe I can do it. And at the Udon studio, we were doing all sorts of artwork and stuff for Marvel. So we had a connection with Joe Quesada, who was the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time. And so we managed to, through the head of Udon, we pitched a story idea. They had this line of books called Marvel Max, you know, the mature reader Marvel books, the like, and so they were looking for more mature reader books. And so we pitched them this idea that was sort of like Battle Royale meets the Marvel universe. It was going to be Murder World, the arcade, you know, book, but it was going to be really violent and nasty, like a Saw film, you know, meets the Marvel universe kind of stuff. I don't even know if there were Saw movies. I guess there were by that point. Anyways, we pitched this, and Joe Quesada emailed us back, and he was like, yeah, this sounds pretty cool, but who the hell are you guys? Like, you have almost no credits. You have no experience. Like, go.
But he replied, right?
He did read it, but he kind of shouldn't have. Like normally it doesn't make it all the way up the ladder, but we just had contacts and we had thrown it past him. So he was like, go get some experience, kids. And so like we did. So 10 years later, I'm now writing regularly for Marvel. And my editor, Bill Roseman, we were having a great conversation. He was just like, do you have any other just like funky Marvel ideas? And I was like, I got this Murder World thing I want to do. And he said, oh, we just did an arcade book. We did this book called Avengers Arena with all these young heroes getting killed in Murder World and all this stuff. And I was like, oh. And he goes, yeah, you can't really do those back to back. And I was like, no, not really. And he goes, well, hold on to it. You never know. So 8 years later, it's 2022, 2023. And I had pitched a book to CB Cebulski. He had asked me to put a bunch of things together. And I pitched this. I get to do Thunderbolts again. But this one was with Clint Barton. And the way I pitched it was I sort of said it was almost like a Ted Lasso book where he's the wrong guy. He's got to step into the role and he's got to be the leader that he doesn't think he can be. Mm-hmm. And CB really liked that. He was sort of like, man, that's a really good way of framing it. If you have other stuff that's like kind of pop culture relevant, but then we can put a Marvel spin on it, please let me know. He goes, if you've got like a Squid Game in your back pocket. And I was like, oh, dude, boy, do I ever have a Squid Game in my back pocket. Marvel has a Squid Game. It's Murder World. And he goes, oh yeah, sure. But how do you make it different? I said, well, and so we had this cool idea. So I took an 18-year-old pitch. This pitch was old enough to vote. Like this pitch was old. and I managed to blow the digital dust off it. And I sent it in and we made it. Ray Fox and I ended up co-writing that book, just like we said we were going to 18 years earlier. And we did a mini series called Murder World. And even though it wasn't a huge seller, it was like vindicating to me on a crazy level that we finally got to do this thing. So
definitely look for it now.
Yeah, right. It's got this fun little backstory to me that we got to do this thing that we had always wanted to do. When I called Ray up and I said, good news, I just repitched Murder World. And he was like, what? Like he couldn't believe it. We are different people than we were when this whole thing started. But it was fun. It was fun to be able to go back and realize we really did have a cool story idea, and we were even better writers who could make it happen now. So that's
basically you kept believing in your idea and it showed its itself.
Yeah, and it even if I never got to pitch it to Marvel, it was still there was a cool idea there, So whether or not I could have still turned it into a Squid Game kind of book, and it probably could have worked, But just because I didn't get it at the time that I wanted to do it doesn't mean it'll never happen, or B, it has to happen that way. You can always look at your ideas and you can strip mine them for other things, or you can repurpose those ingredients. Sometimes I've got a cool character idea or a name or a theme or a bit of dialogue that'll sometimes just sort of hang around for a while, and then you find the right place for it, So I'm much more at peace with that now, but that's because I have enough projects under my belt that I don't feel like I understand when you're starting out, if it's the first thing you're trying to ever pitch and no one's responding to it, you're like, I suck. Everything sucks. It'll never happen. Once you've been through this for, over 20 years, you've had enough projects rejected and you've had enough, hopefully, successes and things. You're much more even keel about it. It's the same way, like, I've been to over 200 conventions around the world. Like, going to a convention can be fun, but they're rarely going to be like, man, if this convention isn't right, my whole career, but your first convention you go to where you show your portfolio for the first time, you're like, if they reject me, I'm doomed. My whole career is ruined. And it's a little hard to say to someone, don't worry about it. Like, just keep at it. Because they're like, dude, this is the one. And you're like, it's probably not the one. Like, it's probably like, maybe it is, but probably not, and you don't want to be mean about it, but you're trying to give people a little bit more clarity, that this is every creative career is a marathon, and you just got to keep in the race as much as you can. And that doesn't mean you're going to get all the success that you want, or you're going to get every opportunity that you hope for, or that you're going to get to work with everyone that you ever imagined. That is not real. That is not realistic or possible. But if you keep making things and you finish them and you put them out into the world, you will grow as an artist and a creator. You will have, hopefully, lifelong friendships and amazing relationships. You will get to see places and do things that you didn't expect. and that's kind of the reward, is that ongoing journey that you get to be a part of, rather than being like, if I don't get to write a Wolverine story, I am a failure as a human being or something, you know.
And Jim, so the next question is from our friend Indrashis. He is questioning about your recent Indian trip, the trip to India. So he's asking, how was your Indian experience interacting with the fans and the Indian comics community over there?
It was really amazing. It was surreal. Like I said, I've been over 200 shows around the world, and Mumbai Comic-Con was one of the most like vibrant and exciting shows I have ever been to. Like, I'm not just kissing ass. It was really, really, really crazy and exciting. And the Indian audience was amazing. I know they don't get as many creators, you know, so you're not going to a show where there's 30, 40 of your favorite comic book creators there necessarily from North America. So in that way, I got 10 times as much attention as I would in a normal show, because there's less than 1/10 the number of kind of North American creators there. And so I felt very fortunate. I felt it was strange at times, honestly. It threw me off because I was one of the only international guests, and I can't blend in because I look different from everybody else. And so in the best way possible, I'm a miniature celebrity while I'm there, and everyone's very excited and they want to meet me, and you're getting all the love. Like, if there's only a couple Marvel creators there, everyone who loves everything Marvel or the Avengers or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like, they want to tell you how great that is. And it's like, well, I didn't work on the movies, but thanks. Like, you know, that's cool. Like, I'm very proud to be part of the broader thing. And the same thing with like Rick and Morty or Samurai Jack or Conan or whatever. I didn't create Rick and Morty. I didn't create Samurai Jack, but I'm very thankful that you love this thing and that you have this chance to express your excitement for it, and that I'm a small part of that. You know, that's very, very heartwarming, and it was really wonderful. The interviews that I had with the media were great. The people treated me wonderfully. The staff at the show were really wonderful. You know, it was like 17, almost 18 hours of travel. And so you are jet lagged in a way. If you've not traveled like that before, it's hard to explain to people, you know. And then you're having this surreal experience of being like surrounded by people and they're freaking out. It was a really amazing adventure, and I'm so glad that I did it, and I am so fortunate that I had the opportunity to do it. And I'm glad I did it also because so many other creators were asking me about it. They're like, would you go back? Did you enjoy it? And I'm like, yeah. And now that I know what it's all about, I also feel so much more prepared to advise other people. Like, if you can build in a couple extra days for recovery, that would be great. You know, get ready. This crowd is going to be some of the most passionate and wonderful people you've ever met. And they want to tell you how much they love whatever you do and whatever you're associated with. Get ready, because, you know, most of the time when you're doing interviews at a North American convention, you might get a local newspaper or radio station, but most of the time it's, you know, pretty small media. And here it was like, oh, you're going to talk to the Associated Press India. Oh, crap. You're going to talk to one of the biggest radio stations, one of the biggest newspapers. And they're asking you questions about whatever. One of the I think Associated Press India asked me about AI, and I said something, and that became a soundbite that went viral sort of on Indian news for a few days afterwards. And on my Google alerts, it was just Indian news sites reposting this thing that I said about creativity and AI and how AI was not the solution or whatever. And you're just sort of like, oh, that is not, CNN is not going to post about me at San Diego Comic-Con. You know what I mean? Like, that, it's a very different kind of a level. And it was very fascinating to be there. And yeah, man, like, it felt like one of those once in a lifetime kind of experiences. And what was amazing was, as soon as I got back, they were like, so do you want to do any other shows in India? And I was like, maybe, I think so. I don't know. Like, so we're talking right now about the possibilities for next year. What I'm really hoping is, if I do another show, that I get to travel with one or two other North American creators that I know, because there's a weird thing when you're traveling internationally for conventions. You're in the middle of a very busy convention and crowds of people, but you're also kind of alone, if that makes sense. Because Yeah, so it's like this weird thing of you're socializing, but you're also detached from everyone because you're sort of different or you're doing
I think
stuff
first time all
differently.
the people, yeah.
Yeah, and so having just one or two other people there where you could be like, "Are you seeing this too? Like, is this happening to us?" You know, instead
Yeah.
of
Somebody
just
who can
me.
somebody who is experiencing the same vibe you're
Yeah,
experiencing.
yeah, it's like the, again, it's like the Zdarsky thing where I'm talking to someone about
Yeah.
what's currently going on in comics. You're like, it would be fun to have a travel buddy and just be like, this is crazy, right? Check this
Yeah,
out,
yes,
that kind of thing. I think would be even more fun. So yeah,
That's nice to hear, Jim, that you loved the experience and
I did.
you're looking forward to visit again. It's
And the
nice to
country,
hear
I
that.
love traveling. I love going new places. I try and tell my students, I said, when you're young, you're going to get job opportunities or the ability. You're not tethered yet. You don't have a family. If you have the opportunity, I know everyone's budgets are different. Everything, everyone's experiences are different, but don't hold yourself back from travel if you have the opportunity. Jump in a car and drive somewhere you've never been before. Get on a plane if you can and go somewhere you've never been before. Don't put yourself in financial strife or danger, but otherwise just have experiences, because those are going to be the fuel of storytelling. Those are going to be the fuel of the experiences that you will draw upon in ways you cannot possibly imagine. Visual information and reference material and interactions and conversations and the people that you meet, the ability to see how people live their lives and how similar we all are and how different we all are. And I think that is so powerful. We could solve so many more things in the world if we could spend more time with each other and see those commonalities,
Yeah.
And every time I go to another country, somewhere I've never been before, it always changes me. It always affects me. It always brings me knowledge or reassures me that, human beings are not that we have so much in common, and that these things are beautiful and universal. And I think it makes me appreciate more, and it also makes me a better storyteller.
Thanks, Jim. There was a question from one of our friend Milan. He was asking about your journey from art professor to comics industry. But Milan, we have already discussed that with Jim in more detail.
And I kept being a teacher, through most of my creative career. I've really only stepped away quite recently from teaching. And teaching has been like a really phenomenal source of joy and inspiration for me. One of the ways you get really good at the basics, at the foundations, is by teaching people those foundations and by seeing every single way for people. I don't mean this to be insulting. Every way for people to screw up the foundation, you know what I mean? Because you're constantly critiquing it and seeing it from different angles and teaching people it and helping reassure them, no, this is what's important. This is the core. This is what you need. And because you're doing it, you're reinforcing it over and over and over and over again. And so your own fundamentals become incredibly strong because you come at it from 100 different angles, 100 different ways, and you have to communicate it over and over and over and over again. And it's like any kind of training where the repetition becomes instinct, And so it's also vastly improved my public speaking skills. When you lecture in front of 50, 60, 100 people in an auditorium 3, 4, 5, 8 times a week, if you have any kind of verbal tick, if you have any kind of weird speaking pattern, your students will instantly destroy you with it. You know what I mean? And they mean that they mean well by it, but if you have any sort of thing, they got you. They notice it, right? I remember the very first class I ever taught. We finished the semester and the students gave me a little gift, and I was so heartfelt. And I opened it up, and they had bought me these little antique keys on a ring. And I was like, what is this about? And they go, well, every single day you tell us the key to this and the key to that.
So many
and so
keys.
we thought we would give you some keys back. And I was like, they meant it really sweetly. And I was so terrified of using the key from that moment on. Like, I realized they must have heard it hundreds of times, Oh. And so you become almost an impenetrable kind of public speaker, where I'm no longer afraid. The very first time I did a lecture, and I was doing a drawing demonstration right in front of the students, and I could tell the minute that I started it that it wasn't working. And I could feel the cold sweat sort of forming, because there's now 40 people who are going to think I suck on the first day of class. And now they'll never trust me. They'll never, they don't think I have the authority to teach them what I'm teaching them. And I got about 30 seconds of the drawing and it's just dead silent. And then I stopped and I said, sometimes it doesn't work on the first go. So we're going to start again. And I took the sheet down and I tore it off this newsprint pad and I started a new drawing. And like everyone exhaled, like everyone, we all knew it sucked. We all knew, we could tell right from the moment I started. And I very slowly did the next drawing and it turned out much better. And I finished the lecture and it was done. And it was like such a potent moment for me, because I went home that night and I went, oh, I'm a teacher now. Like, they still respected me at the end of the day. I made a mistake and they don't think less of me. Okay, I think I might be able to do this. Like, you know.
I think that is similar in the line, like you said, that when you send your pitch to someone and then they don't answer, the same feeling is there, right? And then someone answers. Yeah. So yeah.
But speaking in front of group of people and speaking in front of students is totally different, right? Students are at different levels.
Yeah, it's also funny too. I've done like presentations at schools, you know, and high schoolers are probably way harder than university students. University students are paying to be in your class. So they're way more motivated most of the time. Teenagers are merciless because they're like, they don't even want to be there. If you can get an audience of teenagers to give a damn and they're like actually locked in and they're not checking their phones or whatever, you're like, okay, I think I got something. We're doing all right or whatever in the grand scheme of things. So.
Mm-hmm. Next and the last question is from our friend Nihal Gopinathan. He has a couple of questions on your character. So first is for Conan and versus Samurai Jack. Which one was more fun to work on? What was it like to work? And which house was better to work with, Marvel or IDW? And how different was it working with Jonas and Andy?
That's a good question. Okay, so there's all sorts of different stuff going on there. So I mean, I'm still actively working on Conan, so it's a bit of an odd question in terms of which is better or different. Samurai Jack was a really phenomenal project. I got to work with Andy Soriano, who was one of the designers of the show, and he and I were constantly riffing and having fun and just being goofballs and trying to get some of the energy of the original show onto the page as much as we could. And the show has got this iconic quality to it, and it's got this amazing episodic quality to it where every issue we tried to tell a complete story. It gave me the confidence to write less because so much of that show was silent, you know? And Andy's such a phenomenal artist that I definitely leaned on him in terms of like, hey, design a crazy cool alien or a weird, crazy environment and just kind of go to town on it. Really, we had to please Cartoon Network and Genndy Tartakovsky, the original creator of Jack, but Andy knows him. Like, Andy is his friend and they, you know, helped develop the show together. So that was that much easier, where if Andy was excited about something, he could kind of get it through the halls of power, you know, that much easier. So I think like Samurai Jack was a really fun period of my career, and we had such a ball working on it. Conan is a lot more, it's more difficult, and it's a lot of a deeper experience because I'm working with so many more artists and we have such a bigger plan for it. So it's hard for me to put a thing and say, well, what's better or what's more fun? I mean, Samurai Jack was very fun and it was sort of a surreal roller coaster ride of a thing, whereas Conan is like this ongoing epic that I'm still actively building to this day. Instead of thinking of it like pitching Marvel or pitching IDW, one of the things I've learned is that you're always working with individual editors. So you don't just pitch Marvel. It's not like there's a guy named Marvel and you send them your stuff, or Stan Lee or whatever, or even CB Cebulski, or you're working with individual editors in individual offices. So right now it's like Tom Brevoort is running the X-Men office. So if I had an X-Men style story or anyone in that area, that's who I would be pitching to. So it's about learning what Tom likes and expects versus my own creative taste. You know what I mean? Versus Nick Lowe, who's running the Spider-Man office. One of the things I recommend people do, if you are trying to pitch a story to a publisher, first of all, read as much material from that publisher as you can. It's so valuable to know what they're putting out, and notice patterns. Like, the types of stories that Nick Lowe likes versus the types of stories that Tom Brevoort likes, or Lana Smith, or, you know, Sarah Brunstad, or any of the other editors who are there, Darren Shan, or like, they have their own way of doing things, and it becomes very clear, not just in terms of writers and artists, but even editorially, what kind of stuff they do. And so rather than trying to run uphill and pitch something in the wrong place to the wrong person, understand that those are the people that make those decisions, and try and focus your attention as much as you can. The ultimate example of that used to be when Vertigo was around, you know, in the 90s and 2000s. Mm-hmm. I know Vertigo is coming back, but like the Vertigo of old was so editorially driven. So for example, the oh damn, I'm brain farting right now. The editor who did all the crime stuff, so you're looking at stuff like Scalped or 100 Bullets, is different from the editor who's doing all the supernatural stuff, like all the magic and, you know, fairy folk kind of whimsical, more kind of Vertigo. If you pitch one story to one and one to the other, you would get a rejection, but you might get it if you pitch it to the right person. Do you know what I mean? So you have to target your material. You have to understand who you're pitching to. You're not pitching to the faceless corporation. You're actually pitching to people. Mm-hmm. And the same thing is true at IDW, you know? If you don't know who the editor of the Star Trek books is, or the Dungeons and Dragons books, you're going to have a much harder time pitching stories. If you're just sending it to whom it may concern, you know, it's a much more difficult process, right? Again, if the work is absolutely amazing quality, you will break down a lot of those barriers, but it's a hell of a lot easier to pitch it to a specific person. And as much as it might sound like kissing up, there is nothing wrong with telling, as long as it's true. If you tell someone, hey, I love the comics that you edit, and here are the reasons why. Here's the work that I do, and here's why I think it's compatible with what you do. Man, everyone loves a compliment. Like, and if you're being honest, don't send that generic letter to everyone. Don't send, you know, the same letter that you would send to one editor to another, because they also talk to each other. Okay. So one of the mistakes that people make is they send the form letter and they just fill in the blank and they go, The Incredible Hulk is my favorite comic. I think you'll like my work. And then you're like sending the same letter. The Amazing Spider-Man is my favorite comic, and I think you'll like my work. You're like, you can only play that card once. If it is your favorite comic, say it and mean it, and be able to say why. You know, one of the mistakes that people make as well is they're sending stories, I think, to people. I don't know if they're sending it out of spite. Like, I've literally seen pitches where they're like, you know, this current series sucks. I could do it better. And you're just like, well, guess who hired that person? Like, you know, probably the person you're sending that letter to. Like, this isn't going to go well for you. You don't have to compliment people for things if you don't like it, and you shouldn't. Like, try and be as honest as you can. There's been times where I've been hired where I had an editor contact me and they say, there's a current series, we don't think it's working. Will you read it and tell us what you think is not working? And you're like, okay, my job now is to go in and critique. Like, so no one is, if I'm critical of this book, no one is like, man, that guy's a dick. But if I'm like cold calling you and I'm just like, you know, you guys publish garbage. What if you publish good stuff instead? You're like, wow, it's a hell of a thing, you know? I don't know why it is in creative fields that people think that that's a good way of working, or they think, you know, I try and compare it to other fields where untested people, like I try and explain, someone says, you know, I don't know why Marvel doesn't hire, you know, new writers or untested writers. You're like, what are you talking about? Like, who goes into an award-winning restaurant and they go, your chef sucks. You should let me go into the kitchen. Come on, let me do it. You're like, have you ever worked at a restaurant? You're like, dude, I watch the Food Network all the time. You know? It's like I'm on the baseball field and I'm like, kick that pitcher out. I'm just going to jump on the field. Let me pitch a couple innings. I'll show you how it's done.
I have seen many YouTube videos for that.
Oh, sure. I see us all the time where these guys, they've got this, you know, oh, it's so simple. I would just, you know, just let me run Marvel. And you're like, oh,
yeah.
Just stop it. Like, I
just give me those $billions and I'll handle it.
Don't get me wrong. After a couple pints of beer, I'll tell you how to fix Hollywood and how to keep cancer. We all have those moments. But realistically, that's
this is universal. I think this is universal.
Sure,
what you're saying.
Sure.
Yeah.
All they've got to do is, fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
So next question Nihal has regarding Thunderbolts. So his question is, what did you think about the Thunderbolts movie?
So I haven't seen the Thunderbolts movie. So unfortunately, I just never had a chance to check it out. I've been on just like a sprint for the last couple months. I've been doing convention after convention, and I know what's funny is just because of the internet, I know probably half the movie at this point because I've heard so much about it from friends and from sources and things like that. But I haven't actually had a chance to watch it yet. So hopefully at some point I will. The only bit that they used kind of from my Thunderbolts run was Winter Soldier is, part of the team or what may have you. Most of the other plotline stuff is so different and so divergent that it doesn't really resemble the book that I did, which is fine. I mean, that's the difference between the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the worlds of the comics. So yeah.
And they are calling it New Avengers, not Thunderbolts.
Yeah, and then they changed the name of it anyways. So it's also like it's way more Brian's book when he was doing New Avengers anyways.
Yeah.
So you haven't seen it, but Nihal had this question that would you have written it differently? But every person has a different take, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, if I was Kevin Feige, I'm sure I would have a completely different lineup of movies underway, but we would be on a completely different timeline and that would be very surreal indeed. So yeah.
So, Prasenjit, Amit, any questions?
No,
I think we are already 50 minutes past time.
Yeah, I think we've blasted through the time zones here, but yeah, I hope you guys got some good material out of there. I tried to be as honest as possible. I've always tried to be pretty open and honest about the highs and lows of a creative career and the stuff that I love about it. And it is very, very special. I never try and take for granted the people who read my work, the people who I've enjoyed it over the years, the people who help, pay my bills, but also that it's something very creatively fulfilling for me and that it's a team effort, without these artists, without every book is so much work from all these different people. And one of the mistakes I think people make about comics, because the writer tends to be more consistent on a title, they'll say whatever, it's Jim Zub's Conan book, and you're like, it really is not. Like, it's Rob de la Torre's and it's Doug Braithwaite's and it's Fernando Dagnino's and it's all of us who are contributing to this book month after month. And with the right team, it's very special, and with the wrong team, it will just suck so much. And so we're always working really hard to try and make the best damn books we can, month after month. And I'm very, very, very fortunate that I found a group of people who really sync up well with my sensibilities and that are just busting their ass on every single issue.
So I don't have a question, but I have a comment, right? So Jim, I saw your YouTube TED Talk.
Yeah.
I grew up with dragons, and I really liked it. The analogy that you put, right? The 3 takeaways: empathy, role playing, and storytelling, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the whole way how you took the world of D&D. So D&D, right? Because first when I saw Stranger Things, then I got to know about D&D because we grew up in a different culture, right? We have different kinds of board games. And then I also do a lot of customization action figures. So all the paint and those stuff, right? They also come from D&D. But the way you took the whole journey from your brother to your wife and then put it in a story, waved around, growing up with dragon, right? Like, that was really awesome. And that demonstrated how good a storyteller you are, right? Take a normal stuff and tell a story around your own life journey, right? That takes a very different, I'll say, right? By talking about imaginary characters versus a real people, right? And I really liked it. And how where did that TED Talk happen? It is a college thing, or
man, that was it was actually one of the most difficult things I've ever done. If that sounds, I know it sounds dramatic, but I was approached. So, they do those TEDx talks in all sorts of different cities. And one of the people who organizes he organized ones here around Toronto. He had reached out to me, and I think he assumed I was going to do a superhero based thing. He was sort of like, we'd love for you to do, pitch us an idea for a TED Talk. And because I was writing Avengers at the time, I think it was very much the assumption I was going to do Marvel related. And I said, honestly, the formative thing in my life is Dungeons and Dragons and telling stories, and that feedback loop of role-playing games and interacting with other people made me want to entertain others. And he said, that sounds cool too. Let's do that. But a TED Talk is so different from my own teaching and lectures, and even this kind of conversation we're having here. It is not spontaneous. Like every single one of those commercial images you use has to be approved. That PowerPoint presentation, the script, almost all of it has to go through a pretty severe legal thing. And so I had a really hard time with it, because when I'm up in front of my students, I know my lecture material, I know what I'm going to cover, but I'm also riffing on the students, and we're kind of talking. Like right now, depending on which way the conversation goes, we'll go down different rabbit holes of little anecdotes or discussions or conversations. And I'm pretty good at doing that on the fly. And that's where I feel most comfortable and most confident. And a TED Talk is like, it's this deeply scripted thing, but it has to feel spontaneous, and it has to feel very warm and very real, but you also rehearse the living hell out of it. And those two things don't kind of go together. So I had about 6 months to put the talk together. And the first 3 months, I went through draft after draft of it, and I hated all of them. And then I had a version of it that was me talking about Dungeons and Dragons. And because D&D was so popular with Stranger Things and Critical Role and stuff like that, I did a version of it where essentially I just started talking about how D&D was like my life. And it was pretty good. Luckily, one of the guys that organized the TED Talks, he is a high school teacher. And he said, why don't you come pitch, do a version of your talk to my high school class? He goes, because they're the most vicious audience you've ever seen. Because the minute you're not entertaining, they will lose interest. And you can't keep a 15-year-old's attention if they don't want it. Do you know what I mean? And so I went to his class and I did the talk, and it was weird. It was okay. I did the version of it, and we finished the whole talk, and the students clapped. And then this kid put up their hand and they said, this all sounds pretty cool, mister. What's Dungeons and Dragons? And I was like, oh, I assume everyone knows what D&D is, but this was a classroom full of jocks and nerds and regular people. Yes, amongst the nerd crowd, you know what Dungeons and Dragons is. And yes, amongst whatever, people going to most Comic-Cons, vaguely what Dungeons and Dragons is, or if you've watched whatever Community or, things like that. There's a whole group of people who watch TED Talks. They don't know what Dungeons and Dragons is. So that's where that whole opening section changed, where I was suddenly like, here's what Dungeons and Dragons is. Here's what a role-playing game is. And here's why it changed my life. And then suddenly the narrative started to really function. So what you're seeing in that TED Talk is very well refined. And I'm very thankful I had the chance to refine it. And even then, the scripted version of it started to get almost robotic, where I was like, I could say it like nothing, but I stopped feeling it because I could say it by rote. You know what I mean? And so my wife, I did a version of it where I presented it, and my wife watched it and she said, everything you're saying is you, but you're now a robot. You've now perfectly memorized it, and it sucks because there's nothing real anymore. You've taken all the soft bits, all the hard stuff out. You don't talk like yourself anymore. I think you should put the script away. And I was like, okay. So I put the script away, and for 2 weeks, I would do little presentations, versions of it, where I was remembering the parts, but I was still myself, like I was in a lecture, just like I would remember my lecture material for my students. And then it got good again. And then I was like, oh, I'm good. And I had the slideshow memorized. I knew what the next slide was, but I could just sort of talk. And that's when it finally worked. And I know that sounds crazy, all the amount of work that goes into what ends up being, I think it's 15, 16 minutes or something. But but then I finally did it the day of, and I was so thankful that I had rehearsed it and I had it all sort of down pat, because you step out on that stage and there's a different kind of a pressure, because when I'm in my lecture hall, I feel very comfortable. I know my students, or I know I've done it so many times. Because you're being filmed and you know that thing might go viral, and TED has this, oh my God, it's a TED Talk or whatever, you're going to say something really profound. You feel this incredible sense of pressure. Like my heart was pounding the whole time I was doing it. And I look okay and I look comfortable on camera, but like internally I am sweating bullets. And I finished that whole thing and I got it done. And I remember doing all of it, but there was almost an out of body experience where you finish and you walk backstage and people are clapping or whatever. And a bunch of people are like slapping you on the back, and you grab a cup of coffee and you're just like, okay, I'm going to rewatch that and hope that it went as well as I think it did. It was a really weird experience. And that TED system is also very strange, because they sort of plug you into this system where they have a lot of motivational speakers, of course. And so for about 6 months, you have people contact you and they're like, do you want to redo that speech in front of, like a university group or whatever? We'll fly you to whatever, Wyoming, and you can do that talk again and we'll pay you. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want this to become a weird thing where you pull a string and I go, here's my D&D talk. You know what I mean? Like, it's not really what I'm here to do. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad it went well, but that's not my career path where I'm just going to I can cry on command and tell you this really beautiful story about my life. Like, that's not, I want to tell stories I'm writing, not just like the Jim Zub story, I guess. I don't know. It was weird. It was a really amazing thing, and I'm so glad I did it, but it's also one of the strangest things I've ever done. And when people come up to me and they tell me, they're like, it was really affecting, it was really beautiful, I'm like, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I was losing my mind. Like, it was one of the hardest things I've done. So
Yep. Yes,
I think you came for 1 hour, stayed for 2 hours. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. That sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks
I'm
for
glad
coming.
It worked out.
Yeah, we had a fun hosting you and listening to all your answers, and also we're looking forward to reading all the stories that you'll be churning out soon.
Thank you very much. None of this happens without readers like you, so thank you for supporting my work. And if you are watching this, I hope you guys got a lot out of it, and make sure you keep watching, because I'm sure these guys are going to have lots of other good interviews to come. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. See you. Bye.
Take it easy.
Bye.